Hi, my name is Dave Cairns. I'm the writer and director of Telepathy. I've been a filmmaker for about 15 years in various levels, from a kid running around with a handycam through to heading up a media unit for a major organisation. So been around for quite a while and been doing a lot of different things, but Telepathy was probably the great challenge so far. Probably the biggest crew I've worked with. Very dedicated crew. And it was a great experience. So Telepathy is the story of a young woman named Alina who, in the future, the vast majority of people have telepathic abilities, except for a few. And Alina is one of those few. And the story is about the social change that happens and the discrimination that she faces as the world becomes very different, and how she finds herself very much on the outside of society. So I probably first fell in love with film as a medium when I was in my early teens. I was a bit of a socially awkward kid and just enjoyed sort of the escapism of film. And then when I was 16, I started working at a movie theatre. I think it's sort of the cliche, you know, actors are waiters and directors work at either video stores or movie theatres. And we don't have video stores anymore, so there you go. And at the time, my two sort of passions were photography and drama. And so it kind of made sense to move into film because it's kind of a marriage of those two things. I think to myself sometimes, what was the first sort of like really movie that kind of blew me away? The first time I really watched a film and thought, this is incredible. And my answer is a bit weird because it's a film that nobody gives props to, which is actually 2010. You know, everyone loves 2001, you know, big Stanley Kubrick epic, and that's a great film. But I really liked 2010, not only because it had some of those great visuals in it, but it also had a much better story and much more engaging characters. And I think that's when I really sort of fell in love with storytelling. So the inspiration for Telepathy really came about in a really weird way. I was having a conversation with a friend of mine online, actually, on Facebook. And I couldn't get my head into his position. Like, no matter how much we talked to each other, I couldn't get my head into his headspace. And I couldn't see where he was coming from. And I thought to myself, can I get my head into a space where I would think that discrimination was justifiable? Where it would actually be logical to say, okay, here's a group of people who are rightfully discriminated against by the rest of society. And the only thing I could come up with is if everyone else had some sort of superpower but a small group of people didn't, would it even be justifiable then? I think a lot of people would like to believe that discrimination is something from the past. You know, we'd like to think that it died in the 60s. But then just look at what's happening with the LGBTI community at the moment. Just look at what's happening with the Muslim community at the moment. I think that prejudices are very much alive and well. So to a degree, I think discrimination will always exist to some degree. While it does, we have a responsibility to speak out against it. I think I chose to frame Telepathy as a sci-fi, or to frame the question of discrimination in the science fiction really for two reasons. First of all, I just love sci-fi. I'm just a real nerd that way. The other thing about science fiction is that it's really allows us to examine social issues more objectively. When you take away context from a social issue and you can look at sort of the bare bones of it, sometimes you can examine it more honestly. I think if we had decided to make an historical drama about discrimination, we would had to have picked a specific group. We would had to have picked a specific form of discrimination or an historical event. Whereas with science fiction, we've been able to write a story that can apply to a lot of different people. It's really interesting talking about the female cast, because it is such a topic of discussion at the moment. I've always just preferred writing female characters. But I think the decision to make Alina female was really easy because obviously we had this mother-daughter dynamic, both her mother and her, and then her and her daughter was obviously a really easy decision to make her female. And then the decision to make Ash female was, again, for me, really simple, because I think if it had been a guy, they would have come across a lot more aggressive and a lot more antagonistic, which is not what I wanted from the character. I always said to Josephine that the character was a very fine line between who she is and who we wanted the audience to think she was at any given time. I love writing female characters. I love watching female characters. All of my favorite shows have strong female characters in them. And I find it weird that there's this aversion in entertainment to not have great female characters, because I love great female characters. There are always challenges when you're making a film. With this particular film, I think budget was always a challenge because it became a much larger, more expensive production than we always expected. And props go to Ben, because he just was incredibly supportive and was always sort of willing to say, look, we'll deal with the money. That's what a really good producer does. And I give him incredible credit for that. The film would not have been made without that kind of dedication from Ben. The other probably challenge of the film was the ending. I always struggle with endings as a writer. The balance was, how obvious do you want to make the end? I always wanted to make it like really subtle, and then there was a feeling that it was too subtle and the audience didn't quite understand. So that's why we added the market. So we sort of set up that concept in a more logical, more straightforward way where it could be commented on. So when it happens at the end, it makes a bit more sense. One of the things I really love about technology today and the internet is that there are a lot of creatives out there, and there's a lot of really good content. And so the question of how is telepathy going to stand out in a crowded marketplace is a really good question. And I think it'll be interesting to see what happens when we finally manage to get it out to an audience, what sort of reaction there will be. And one of the things I like about Telepathy is that it is a film that has a theme that's relevant to a lot of people today. But it's also told in a way that's not too abstract. It's told in a way that I think an audience will engage with. All we can really do is hope that we've made a really good piece and that the audience will respond to that.